In a busy hospital room in Baltimore, Elena, a dedicated young nurse, finds herself in the middle of a tender moment. Her gentle care for a frightened child catches the attention of Cole Harrington, the influential president of one of the largest conglomerates in the United States, who is visiting on a philanthropic mission. Their worlds collide briefly yet deeply, sparking a silent connection between two lives that are worlds apart. She had no idea that this encounter would change everything. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and share in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Elena, a dedicated young nurse at a community hospital in Baltimore, meets Cole Harrington, the influential president of one of the largest corporate conglomerates in the United States, during a philanthropic visit. As she tends to a frightened child, he watches her discreetly, moved by her compassion. This casual encounter stirs something deep within both of them, a silent connection between two worlds that could not be more different. The community hospital in Baltimore, where Elena worked tirelessly, was always immersed in a blend of frantic energy and hushed silence. It was a place where lives intertwined in their fragility, but also in the hope of healing. The daily routine was marked by the cries of babies, the distant hum of the halls, and the hurried steps of nurses darting from one place to another, each one trying to balance life and death. Elena was a pillar within it all. But on this day, she wasn't caring for just any child. A little boy no more than 6 years old had come in with a high fever, but his fear of being touched by strangers had him crying relentlessly. He trembled, eyes wide open, almost too weak to face the treatment. Elena, with her warm smile and unshakable calm, knew what he needed most was someone who would look at him with empathy, someone who would offer him the assurance that he wasn't alone. Gently, she approached, whispering comforting words as she placed her hand on his forehead, easing some of the terror the boy felt. The pain in the child's face seemed to soften under Elena's touch, but for Cole Harrington, that moment meant something much deeper. He was there as part of his philanthropic mission, a quick visit to the hospital to see firsthand the work of his foundation, which made significant donations to underserved healthcare institutions. Cole, the president of one of the largest corporate empires in the United States, had a life filled with commitments, high-level meetings and expectations that forced him to be somewhat numb to human suffering. His world was rigid, calculated, and the people around him were treated as pieces that fit into a machine. Human connection, genuine emotion, those things seemed distant, distorted in a world where power and wealth spoke louder than any gesture of affection. But in that instant, as he watched Elena care for the boy with such compassion, something inside him was touched in a way that he hadn't expected. His eyes, usually cold and impassive, softened. There was nothing grand about it. There was no dazzling luxury, no fanfare. Just the simplicity of a woman making a difference in the life of a small human who, for a moment, felt safe. And that simple scene was more powerful than any board meeting or billion-dollar contract. He watched her quietly, trying not to draw attention to himself. She was completely absorbed in the task of calming the child, not noticing the man who ruled the corporate world standing in the background. But Cole couldn't take his eyes off her. How could someone like her, so human in a place that seemed to swallow humanity, exist? The hospital, the patients, the hustle and bustle around them, all of it faded in the presence of this woman who radiated calm, as if her simple touch was the answer to every affliction in the world. His heart, which rarely allowed itself moments of vulnerability, started to race, almost imperceptibly. Elena was the antithesis of everything he knew, of everything he had built. While he surrounded himself with power and riches, she gave herself to the care of others, expecting nothing in return. In her eyes, Cole saw a purity that disarmed him, and somehow the silent connection between them seemed to grow in the space between a glance and a touch. What began as a simple moment of observation soon turned into an unease. Something deep inside him stirred. He didn't know exactly what, but he felt that this encounter, this simple moment, would change something within him. He felt a strange mixture of admiration and respect, but also something he couldn't name, a desire to know more about the woman who had the power to remind him what it was to be genuinely human. When Elena finished tending to the boy, rising from his side and giving him a reassuring smile. Cole, without realizing it, took a step forward. Their eyes met finally, and for a brief moment time seemed to slow down. Elena smiled shyly, as though for the first time noticing the tall, imposing man watching her. She, deep down, felt a slight unease seeing him there. What was such a powerful man doing in a community hospital? He seemed out of place among the narrow corridors and walls that were covered with old plaques, peeling paint. The contrast between them was stark, but for some reason, she felt something stir in her chest. Perhaps it was the way he looked at her, in a way that she couldn't quite understand, but that made her feel as though, somehow, he saw something in her that no one else did. Before she could say anything, one of Cole's assistants called him, interrupting the brief moment of connection between them. He looked back and with a nod indicated that it was time to leave. But before turning, he stole one last glance at Elena, a look she still couldn't fully comprehend, but one that made her think about the man for hours after the encounter. And without knowing, she too left a part of herself imprinted within him. A simple interaction, but with a silent power like an invisible thread that now connected them. And somehow, without either of them realizing, this would be the first step on a path they would both soon walk, a path that would lead them to places and emotions neither of them ever imagined. But what would happen when Elena and Cole's worlds collided again? A few weeks after that silent encounter, Elena's phone rang on a quiet afternoon at the hospital. The voice of Cole Harrington's assistant on the other end was smooth, yet carried an authority that made Elena's heart race. "Elena, President Harrington has invited you to a meeting at his office in Washington, D.C. He would like to speak with you personally. The meeting will be next Tuesday at 10 a.m. She fell silent for a moment, the phone feeling like it weighed a ton in her hand, as if it were made of stone. It wasn't common for people like Cole Harrington to invite nurses from a community hospital to such formal meetings. There was something in the tone of the assistant's voice that seemed like an invitation to something far bigger than any professional meeting. And at the same time, the mere mention of his name and knowing he was waiting for her made her chest tighten in a way she couldn't describe. What did he want from her? The doubt spread through her mind as she hung up the phone, trying to find something that would explain the request. She was just a nurse in a neighborhood hospital while he ruled an empire. But on that chilly autumn morning, something inside her urged her to accept. She knew she couldn't refuse, even without knowing why this invitation felt so important, and at the same time, so unsettling. On Tuesday, the journey to Washington, D.C. felt like a trip to another world. The train swayed gently as Elena gazed out the window, the Baltimore landscape blurring behind her. She found herself thinking about the last few weeks, about what little she knew of the man who had invited her. Cole Harrington was an enigma, and she couldn't deny the growing curiosity she felt about him. What did he expect from her? She was about to step into a territory where her simple life had no place. But for some reason, her heart still beat fast. Arriving at the imposing building where Cole's presidential office was located, Eleanor felt like she was stepping into a world very different from the one she came from. The lobby was vast, with gleaming marble reflecting the soft lights falling from the high ceiling. An assistant guided her to the elevator, and she ascended to the highest floor, where Cole Harrington's empire seemed to stretch endlessly. When the elevator doors opened, she was greeted by a massive hall with glass windows offering a breathtaking view of Washington, D.C. Elena walked through the main room, her legs feeling heavier with each step. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew this was a crucial moment. The assistant led her to a dark wooden door, and when it opened, Eleanor entered Cole Harrington's presidential office. He was there with his back to her, looking out at the city below, his gaze distant, as if pondering something beyond anyone's sight. His posture was as firm and commanding as his presence, and seeing him like that, Eleanor couldn't help but feel like an intruder. But then he slowly turned around, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made everything around them seem to vanish. "You're here. Please, have a seat." Cole gestured to the chair in front of him, his deep voice resonating through the room, filling every corner. Eleanor sat down, but she couldn't help but notice the tension that hung in the air. She felt that this meeting carried something far beyond just a business matter. And to her surprise, Cole Harrington seemed as aware of the tension as she was. He studied her for a moment, his eyes analyzing her with a precision that made her nervous. Finally, he spoke, his voice now softer but still filled with something undefined. "I had to know, are you sure about this, Elena?" The question came like a whisper, but it was deep, as though he was asking for more than just a confirmation of her presence. It was a question that touched something fundamental, something she didn't know if she could answer clearly. A shiver ran down Elena's spine. The question wasn't just about being here, in this room, with him. It was about something deeper. It was about what she truly wanted in this moment, what she expected from herself and from Cole. Something in his eyes seemed to say that he wasn't just questioning her willingness to be in this meeting. He was probing what she felt, what she was seeking. The tension between them grew, but somehow there was no fear. There was an expectation, a quiet anticipation of something they both knew was about to happen, something that would change everything. Elena looked at him, trying to gather her strength to speak, but the truth was she didn't know how. I don't know what you expect from me, Cole," she began, her voice softer than she would have liked. "But I'm here. And somehow, I know I need to be here." He slowly approached the desk, his eyes never leaving hers. The distance between them seemed to shrink with every second, and Elena felt the pressure of his presence intensify. She didn't know what he wanted, but she knew that somehow this conversation would be the start of something inevitable. "And that's enough for me." Cole smiled slightly, but there was something behind that smile, something that made the air around them feel heavier. The tension was palpable, but even so, Elena felt that there was no turning back. She had taken the first step toward something unknown, something she couldn't fully understand, but knew would change her life in ways she could never predict. But what did he want from her? What would come after that simple yet heavy question? The presidential office, typically lit by the coldness of artificial light and impersonal glass, now felt like a private sanctuary, surrounded by the stillness of the night. The large glass windows, which once displayed the hustle and bustle of the city, now reflected only the silence and calm that had settled between Cole and Elena. Outside, the lights of Washington, D.C. sparkled like distant stars in the sky, but inside that space, everything seemed suspended, as if time had stopped to allow the moment to unfold. The air was thick, heavy with the tension between them. Both were aware of the magnitude of what was about to happen, but somehow it felt as though fate had placed them there, in that instant, for them to finally surrender to something they had resisted for so long. Every word they exchanged was laden with unsaid meanings, and every glance seemed like a silent invitation for both to cross the fine line between repressed desire and unconditional surrender. Elena felt her heart pounding uncontrollably, her body responding in ways she didn't know how to control. The feeling of being there, in that intimate, private space, with the most powerful man she had ever met, seemed surreal. She wanted to speak, wanted to question, but the words failed her. What she truly wanted was to lose herself in that moment, not think about the consequences, not think about anything else, except the intensity of the connection between them. Cole, for his part, was aware of every movement she made. He watched her with a reverent care, each gesture of hers measured, respected. When he finally moved closer, he didn't make a sudden motion. Instead, he approached slowly, allowing her to feel his presence, silently asking with his eyes before every touch. There was a silent communication between them, an unspoken understanding that this moment was much greater than a mere physical encounter. It was an emotional surrender, a shared vulnerability that both needed to explore. Then finally their lips met. The kiss was gentle at first, tender and hesitant, as if they were both experiencing for the first time what it meant to have a true connection. The world around them disappeared, and the sound of the distant city blended with the sound of their hearts beating in unison. The tension that had built up over the days now transformed into something tangible, something that could no longer be contained. It was like the opening of an emotional dam, where every sigh, every touch, was an unspoken promise. Cole wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if protecting something precious. His touch was firm yet gentle, as if he understood the fragility of the moment and the need for care. He pulled her closer, and Elena, even though nervous, surrendered completely, letting herself be swept away by the wave of sensations that consumed her. There was no rush, no impulsivity. The night was being built meticulously, each of their movements becoming part of a silent dance of surrender and trust. The dark leather sofa, once simple and functional, now became the stage for something much deeper. Elena, though inexperienced, didn't feel afraid. She felt safe in the arms of this man who, despite his armor of power, showed a tenderness she hadn't imagined existed. Every caress seemed like a promise, a silent pact between them, and Cole's delicate touches reassured her, making her feel that for the first time she was truly being seen without judgment, without expectations. The night continued at a natural pace, as if time had slowed down to allow them to discover each other in their entirety. Between whispered laughter and soft kisses, the barriers both had built throughout their lives began to fall. It wasn't just physical attraction that united them, but something much deeper. It was a desire for genuine connection, a desire to understand the other in their essence. Elena, with her shy touches and anxious gaze, surrendered to him, and Cole, with his dominant presence and careful touch, surrendered to her in a way he had never imagined possible. When they finally lay down, intertwined, the world around them disappeared. There was no guilt, no fear. What existed between them at that moment was something stronger than any doubt or insecurity. Elena's body found solace in the warmth of Cole, and his body found refuge in the softness and surrender of hers. It was as if, for the first time, they were both whole, as if they had finally found a place where they belonged. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a shared silence, a silence full of unsaid meanings. Elena fell asleep on Cole's chest, her heart light, as if finally she had found her place in the world. For Cole, it was the first time in years that he didn't feel alone. In the warmth of that moment, he realized that something deeper than any contract or title had been born between them, a bond of souls, forged in the purest intimacy. The night passed, and the silence in the presidential office now carried something new. What had begun as a simple physical attraction had transformed into something much bigger, something they couldn't fully comprehend. But in that moment, all that mattered was the now, the connection they had created. And so, that night, something changed. They didn't know how or when, but they knew they had crossed an important boundary. In the days following that night, something inexplicable formed between Elena and Cole, something that could no longer be ignored or hidden for much longer. The chemistry between them, although initially shy and tentative, grew, deepened, and became impossible to conceal. But that was exactly what they needed to do. The world around them was not a place where a love like theirs could be accepted, let alone understood. It was a love beyond the boundaries, hidden behind the curtains of a life that seemed to be designed for success, not for personal happiness. Their meetings began to take place in the shadows, away from public view, away from anyone who could ask questions. When Cole called on Elena, it was always in discreet locations, far from the spotlight and the reach of the media that surrounded him. An afternoon at an isolated house in the Virginia mountains, a dinner in a dull restaurant located in a quiet neighborhood where he knew no one would recognize him. The connection between them grew slowly, like a plant that, although still young, began to sink its roots deep into forbidden soil. But the truth was that as difficult as the secret was, it also fed their love. Eleanor felt valued in a way she never imagined possible. Unlike everyone else who saw her as just a nurse, a small insignificant part of a larger corporate machine, Cole saw her as someone with inherent worth. He looked at her as a real woman, not just a mere piece in his world of business. To him, she represented something pure, something unattainable, something he desperately wanted to protect and explore. And for Eleanor, Cole became increasingly hard to resist. When he looked at her with those penetrating eyes, she felt that for the first time, someone was truly seeing her. It wasn't about wealth or power. It was about connection. He saw her not as a nurse or a symbol of something, but as a woman. He showed her that beneath all his empire, there was still a part of him that was lost and needed something she alone could offer, the simple touch of a genuine soul. Their relationship became a game of silences and whispers, exchanged glances during meetings and occasional encounters, encrypted messages and secret codes only they understood. They communicated through discreet gestures and small details that no one else would notice, like a quick glance in a crowded room or a text message that seemed ordinary at first glance, but carried an immense emotional weight. Elena never imagined she would live a love so full of emotion, but at the same time so cautious. There was the constant fear of being discovered, the fear of what might happen if others found out the truth between them. She knew that for Cole the risk was even greater. A relationship with her, a woman from a lower class, would threaten his empire, his public image. The repercussions would be massive, both personally and professionally. Yet something inside Elena made her persist. Something inside Cole did too. There was an intensity there, something that couldn't be denied. He was more vulnerable with her than with anyone else in his life. He allowed her to see his fragility, his deepest doubts and fears, things he would never share with any of his colleagues or allies. He trusted her in a way he trusted no one else, and that touched her deeply. It was as if, being with her, he could finally be who he really was, without the need to hide behind the masks of CEO and magnate. Eleanor, in turn, was fascinated by the vulnerability Cole displayed. He wasn't perfect. He didn't have all the answers, and that made her see him as more human, more real. He was someone who also needed something more, something she could offer, something no one else seemed capable of giving him. As the relationship deepened, the love that bound them grew stronger, more solid. Every clandestine meeting, every stolen moment, made their connection even more solidified. Eleanor felt safe in his arms, but also knew that what they were doing wasn't easy or without risk. They were dancing on the edge of an abyss, not knowing what the future would bring, but they knew that, in that moment, what mattered most was the intensity of what they were sharing. Cole, for his part, also knew that there was something there that couldn't be discarded. He had had relationships and affairs before, but nothing compared to what he felt for Elena. He knew their relationship was risky, but there was a part of him that felt completely drawn to her simplicity, the way she made him feel complete. When he touched her, he felt like, finally, he had found something that not all the money and power in the world could give him. But like everything forbidden, their relationship was doomed to live in the shadows. They knew they couldn't let the world see them as they were, and this only fueled the fire of love between them. They were forced to hide, to meet in stolen moments, in places where no one could recognize them. And while the world continued to revolve around power and fame, Eleanor and Cole lived a secret love that seemed to be the only real thing in their lives. But what would happen if that love became impossible to keep secret? Could they face what was to come, or would the pressure of the world separate them forever? In the days following the last time Elena and Cole were together, something began to change within Elena. She didn't know exactly what it was, but she felt a constant weariness, a strange sensation that lingered with her throughout the day. She, who had always been energetic and focused, began to notice that she had less energy, that her body wasn't responding as it used to. The nausea came and went, but it was the exhaustion that bothered her the most. It wasn't the kind of tiredness that could be cured with a good night's sleep. It was something deeper, more persistent. Elena tried to ignore it, but each day seemed harder. She, who had always been meticulous about her health, began to suspect that something was happening. As she observed the symptoms, a tightness gripped her chest. Something inside her told her that what was happening wasn't just the result of overwork. She knew she needed to confirm it, but the fear of taking the next step paralyzed her. And then, in a moment of courage, she decided to take the test. The confirmation came with the precision of a lightning bolt. Positive. She was pregnant. The news hit her with a mix of emotions she could barely process. At first, there was an overwhelming wave of disbelief. How could this be happening? How could she, a simple woman from a community hospital in Baltimore, be expecting a child with a man like Cole Harrington? He, the president of an empire, the most powerful man she had ever known, someone who didn't seem to have any interest in family, heirs, or anything beyond business and success. Now he would be a father, and she, the mother of his child. The thought seemed as surreal as a distant dream. Eleanor allowed herself to fall onto the bed, her eyes fixed on the pregnancy test she still held. The world around her seemed to slow down, the colors of the room blurring as her mind raced in 1,000 different directions. She wondered if Cole would react the same way she was reacting now, Fear, surprise, joy, and above all, an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. He had everything to lose: his empire, his image, his control over everything he had built. And she didn't even know where to start. How would he react? Would he see this as a blessing or as a ticking time bomb, something that could destroy everything he had worked so hard to achieve? She lay there for a long time, trying to process, trying to imagine what would come next. The thought of telling him made her tense, anxious. She didn't know whether to tell him immediately or wait longer, but what she felt was a growing pressure. He needed to know, but she feared his reaction. The possibility of being a mother both excited and terrified her. How could she raise a child in a world where the rules were made by people like Cole? She knew the child would be loved, but it would be difficult to balance that love with the reality that he belonged to a man whose priorities until that moment had been far from anything involving family. She repeatedly wondered if her simple life, with her calling to care for others, would be enough to protect their child from a world that only seemed to see power and money. And then fear returned. The fear of what pregnancy meant for her, and most of all for Cole. What if he wasn't ready? What if this was a burden for him? She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to be seen as a threat to what he had built. She also thought about how he would probably react to the idea of being a father. He had never expressed interest in children before, and honestly, he seemed more focused on power than on raising a family. But for a brief moment, she allowed herself to dream. What if he was different with her? What if he saw the pregnancy as an opportunity to create something new, something beautiful, something he never knew he wanted? Doubt consumed her. She wanted the happiness that this baby could bring, but she also wanted Cole to be part of it. She didn't know if he would be willing to open his life to that. And once again, doubt tightened in her chest. She was about to give him news that would change everything, and she didn't know if she was ready for his reaction. Elena spent the next few days in a frenzy, torn between the desire to tell Cole immediately and the need to wait until she had more clarity on what this meant for her and for him. But the truth was, what scared her the most was the idea that his reaction could be negative, and worst of all, the possibility that he would push her away, that he would see her as a distraction or an obstacle to his plans. She knew that if there was any way to make this work, it would be with him by her side. But would he be able to be the man she needed him to be? Or, more importantly, was she ready to see Cole's more vulnerable side, to be part of his life in a way she never imagined? Finally, with her heart heavy and her mind full of uncertainties, Elena decided she needed to speak with him. The expectation consumed her. She knew that by sharing the news, she would be exposing something much deeper than just her pregnancy. She was revealing a part of herself that she had kept hidden, even from her own heart. She looked at the phone, Cole's number flashing on the screen, and took the first step toward the unknown. Their story was about to change forever, and she didn't know if she was ready for the emotional roller coaster that was about to follow. Elena knew the moment had come. The doubt, the anxiety, the fear, all of it had been building up inside her, a growing pressure that could no longer be ignored. She had waited, tried to find the perfect moment, the perfect way to tell Cole what was happening inside her. But as time passed, the weight of her own uncertainty became unbearable. She needed to share the truth. He needed to know. She called him to a discreet meeting at a secluded restaurant in a quiet corner of Washington, D.C. Yes, away from the crowds and cameras that were always in his life. She knew he was also aware of the gravity of her decision. It wasn't just the pregnancy that was at stake. It was everything they had built up to that point, what she felt for him, what he might feel for her. Their relationship wasn't simple, and more than ever, she knew this would put them on a path where the only certainty was uncertainty. When Cole arrived, the first thing he noticed was the expression on Elena's face, tense, closed off, but at the same time vulnerable. He sat down across from her, and the usual lightness in their conversation seemed to vanish, replaced by a heavy silence. Something was about to be revealed, something that would change everything. "Cole," Elena began, her voice trembling. I need to tell you something." She let out a long sigh, trying to find the strength to continue. I'm pregnant." Those words, spoken in a near whisper, hit Cole like a shock. He stared at her, his eyes wide, his usually implacable expression now softened by a surprise he didn't try to hide. He didn't respond immediately, and that only made the silence between them feel even denser. She could see the words forming in his mind, the reactions accumulating in the lines of his face. But he didn't speak. He just watched her, as if unsure how to react. For a moment, fear gripped Eleanor. Would he be angry? Would he see this as a mistake, a complication? She feared that no matter how intense their relationship had been, the revelation that she was carrying his child might be something he wouldn't know how to handle. Finally, after what seemed like minutes, Cole spoke, his voice heavy with a gravity Elena had never heard before. You're pregnant? He repeated the question, as though trying to comprehend the magnitude of what she had just said. But how? How did this happen, Elena? She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to regain her composure. She knew he was in shock. His life was governed by rational decisions, controlled, always calculated. Fatherhood had never been part of his equation. The idea of being responsible for a child, the legacy, the inheritance, and this was new to him. And it was clear that this revelation left him completely disoriented. I don't know what this means for us, she finally said with a sigh. I know this changes everything, Cole, but I can't carry this responsibility alone. What happens now? How are you going to react to this? Cole leaned back slightly from the table, his eyes fixed on the empty space in front of him. Elena knew what he was doing. He was trying to process. But what he didn't know was that in his process, he was once again hiding the emotions that were beginning to overflow. He slowly shook his head, as though trying to understand what was happening. Then suddenly anger took over his face. Not anger at Elena, but anger at himself, at the situation, at what he felt might ruin his life. You have no idea what this could do to my life, Elena, he said, his voice quieter now, tense. The image I've built, my career, the people who depend on me. I can't let this affect us like this. I can't let this affect the future of what I've built. The initial shock gave way to fear, the fear of losing everything he had worked for. His empire, his position, his influence, all of it could be shaken by a simple choice. He felt powerless, cornered. Suddenly, the reactions he had feared began to take shape in his mind. I will protect you, Elena, and I will protect this baby, he said finally in a softer tone, but still carrying immense weight in his voice. But you need to understand, there are people out there who won't see this the way we do. We're going to need to keep everything secret for now. You can't talk to anyone. We can't let this get out. She watched him, trying to understand. He promised protection, but what she heard wasn't comfort. It was a request to hide something so true, so significant, in the name of what he feared losing the most. She knew he was trying to protect her, but she also knew he was protecting himself in the same way. But what she didn't expect was what happened next. As external forces began to come into play, the threats became clear. Cole's advisors, lawyers, publicists, they were all waiting, eager to resolve the problem. They suggested silence, distancing, and the possibility of hiding Elena even further from the public eye. Cole was beginning to be sucked into the whirlwind of his corporate life, and while he was protecting her from the scandal, he was being dragged into a reality he wasn't prepared to face. And as their relationship started to be distorted by the external pressure, Elena felt the coldness of the corporate world threatening to destroy what little trust remained in the man she loved. Their relationship, which had once seemed to flourish in the sweetness of secrecy, was now being dragged by the force of societal expectations, social and political pressures. They were about to lose themselves, not only because of what the pregnancy meant for Cole's future, but also because, deep down, he had already begun hiding the truth to ensure the world didn't discover it. The days dragged on as if time had lost its natural rhythm. Every morning seemed colder, more distant, and every night fell like a silent curtain over the emptiness Eleanor began to feel within herself. When Cole left her, it was as though the world around her had crumbled as well. She didn't know what hurt more, his distance or the feeling that she herself was sinking into an ever-growing solitude, something that seemed impossible to escape. The pregnancy, which should have been a blessing, now became a weight she carried alone. She knew she wasn't physically alone. The baby inside her was her constant companion. But the loneliness ran deeper than that. It was the loneliness of feeling forgotten by the man who had once made her believe she was the center of his world. She often wondered if everything she had felt had been real, or if it had been just a fleeting illusion, a fantasy she had created to protect herself from a reality that now felt cruel. When the visit stopped, Elena tried to rationalize. She knew Cole had a busy schedule, that the political and business pressures on him were immense. But the reality was harsher than she wanted to admit. He had left her behind. There were no more midday calls, no more short messages of affection. And when calls did come, they were delegated to assistants, always distant and impersonal, as if he were trying to avoid any kind of personal interaction. Gradually, his absence became more evident, more painful. She often found herself sitting on the couch, her eyes fixed on her phone screen, waiting for a message, waiting for some sign that he still cared. But when the notification came, it wasn't from him. It was someone from his team, passing along information he probably should have shared personally. The feeling of being just another responsibility for him grew, and the love she had once felt for him, the love that had made her feel special, began to fade, replaced by a pain she didn't know how to deal with. Eleanor's body, once radiating energy and life, now seemed weaker, more tired. The nausea that accompanied her pregnancy wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. The feeling of abandonment consumed her, and sometimes she wondered if she had done something wrong. If, in some way, she had become a burden to Cole, someone he no longer wanted to be involved with. The love he had promised to protect, the love he had sworn would be constant, now seemed empty, like a promise that had never been fulfilled. She could feel the eyes of those around her, friends, family, even co-workers, who now looked at her with a mix of sympathy and pity. They knew something had changed, but no one knew what. They all spoke about her in hushed tones, always with kind but empty words, always asking if she was okay, as if it weren't obvious what was happening. She saw herself becoming more isolated, feeling like a shadow, a figure that went unnoticed by everyone, even herself. What had she become? A woman in love who now saw herself as a hidden burden, a woman who had been left behind without even knowing why. The promise of protection Cole had made to her, that he would protect her, that they would face everything together, now seemed like a distant memory. It was as if she were merely on the edge of his life, as if he had created an invisible wall between them, a wall that separated her from his world. Sometimes she wondered if he even cared about the pain she was feeling. Did he know how she was? Did he know the emptiness she carried every day, the tears she tried to hide, the weight on her heart, tight with the fear that he had left for good? In one of her rare moments of clarity, Elena sat at the kitchen table, her fingers rubbing the cold surface of the wooden table. The baby inside her stirred, a small reminder that something precious was being created, something that still had the power to bring light into her life. But that light now seemed distant, obscured by the darkness of her own feelings. She closed her eyes, trying to remember the moments when Cole made her feel alive, but the memories seemed distorted, as though they were passing through a filter that made them unreal. She wanted to believe that he would return, that he would reach out to her, that he would realize the mistake and come back to her, but reality was becoming harder to bear. She didn't know what to expect, or what to do. Was he the man she thought he was, or had he only been an illusion? And more importantly, could she continue living without him, without the feeling of being by his side, of being important to him? The weeks passed, and with them, the sense of loss grew stronger. Every day without news from Cole was another day harder to endure, and while she tried to find strength within herself, the truth became more painful with every breath. The doubt was now unbearable. She wanted to believe in their love, but reality seemed intent on crushing everything she had dreamed. She was beginning to question whether what she felt for him was real, or just an illusion created by loneliness and the pain of loss. She slowly stood up from the table, walking over to the window, looking at the horizon, where the city lights blended with the dark sky. She felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, the weight of a life that was no longer the same. And while the baby inside her moved once more, she made a silent promise. She would survive this. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but she would. Because now, She was the only one who could guarantee the strength to move forward. The silence, which had been carefully cultivated between Cole and Elena, could no longer be maintained. Their lives, which until then had unfolded behind the scenes, in the shadows, were about to be brought to light in an unexpected and relentless way. The media, like a hungry monster, soon found what it was looking for, and the secret Elena and Cole had tried to hide began to spread quickly, taking with it the privacy they had struggled to preserve. It all started with a simple yet innocent question at a press conference. A reporter, eager for sensationalism, made a quick mention of Cole's personal life, asking about his relationship with the nurse from Baltimore, unaware of the gravity of the issue. The words, thrown into the air without any malicious intent, set off a chain reaction. Within hours, rumors began to gain momentum, and the curiosity of journalists turned into obsession. The following day, the first article appeared, with a headline that was both a shock and a condemnation: "The Secret Heir of the Harrington Empire." Eleanor's photo was the first to grace the newspaper's front page, an image of her at the hospital, captured by paparazzi days earlier, when she still believed her life was far from any spotlight. She was smiling, kind, and dedicated, but now her image was entirely different. The mysterious woman carrying the child of the most powerful man in the country. Photographs of Elena began to flood the news outlets, pictures of her entering and leaving the hospital, leaving her home, walking down the street. The scandal took over the media, and the headlines grew more intense, more cruel with each hour. Who is the secret lover of the magnate? Elena, the young nurse, a threat to the Harrington Empire? The Empire's secret, Cole Harrington's baby. The media treated her like an intruder, a woman who had suddenly become the center of a drama no one had predicted. Elena, not knowing how to react, was sucked into a whirlwind of insults, speculations, and invasions of her privacy. Her colleagues at the hospital began to distance themselves, not because she was to blame, but because they feared being associated with the scandal. Unwanted questions started coming from all directions, and she could hardly leave her home without being followed by cameras. The words that were said about her in the media, and especially in person, grew more cruel, often crossing the line of human decency. She was being treated like a figure of ridicule, a woman who had not only broken the rules of what was acceptable in society, but had also exposed the privacy of a man like Cole, a man who, unlike her, was used to being at the top. At her home, the phone calls never stopped. Lawyers, public relations assistants, Cole's advisors, each one trying to control what was going on, trying to protect his image, his empire, his business, but no one cared about Elena. No one asked how she was dealing with the invasion of her personal life. Everyone was only concerned with what Cole would do next. At Cole's office, the advisors pressed him relentlessly. "You need to deny everything, Cole. Say it's a fabrication, that you have nothing to do with it. You must protect your image. We can't let this spiral out of control." They spoke of the future of the company, about the political and financial risks an unexpected fatherhood could bring to the Harrington name. There was no room for emotions, just cold calculations. They demanded a quick response, a public denial, something that could keep Cole's empire intact. What was truth in the end, if appearance was preserved? But Cole, with his eyes fixed on a horizon he had never imagined reaching, began to realize that he couldn't do what everyone expected. He felt the pressure from all sides, but there was a growing force inside him, a need to be honest, to face what was happening. He knew he couldn't continue with the lie. He couldn't keep hiding something so significant. There was something bigger at play, something priceless, and that was the love he was beginning to understand for Elena and the child she carried. In a decision that surprised even his closest advisors, Cole called a press conference. That morning, the building that was once a fortress of business and negotiations now prepared for something very different. The press gathered at the stairs, cameras and microphones waiting for the entrance of the president of Harrington Enterprises. When he walked into the room, there was no longer the air of absolute power, but something more vulnerable, something he hadn't known he could show. He looked at the reporters, his eyes fixed, his tone grave and calm, and made the only statement he could make. "Yes, the child is mine, and the woman carrying this child is the most important person in my life." The silence in the room was profound. There was no more space for speculation, no more room for doubt. He was revealing his truth, and by doing so, he was freeing himself from the pressure of a life built on external expectations, on an image he never wanted to carry. He continued, "From this moment on, I will begin delegating duties to focus on my family. What I am, what I have, is all for my family now." The press conference was met with a sea of mixed reactions, but in the end, there was something undeniable in those words. Cole had made a brave decision. He had chosen to stand by Elena, to face whatever came next, and defend what, to him, was now the most important thing. No longer business, no longer image, but the woman carrying his child, and the possibility of building a new life with her. When the cameras turned off and the noise of the media quieted, Elena watched the press conference from her apartment, tears in her eyes. They weren't tears of fear, but of relief. The man she loved had taken a bold step, one that could have destroyed everything, but in reality was creating something new, something stronger than any contract or financial agreement. He had chosen her, and somehow, in that moment, their future seemed possible again. Chaos had taken over the heart of Washington, D.C. Journalism, as always, had begun to feed on a scandal. But this time, the headlines igniting the pages weren't being driven by the usual political or business speculation. No, this story was different. Cole Harrington's empire, built over years of hard work, calculated strategy, and unwavering control, was being shaken by something unexpected, something he couldn't control. The revelation that he was expecting a child with Eleanor, a young nurse who, until now, had been completely outside the world of magnates and corporate high echelons. The pressure backstage was immense. His advisors, dressed in expensive suits with serious expressions, ran from one side to another, debating what to do. To them, Cole's image was at stake. His empire could be threatened, and the last thing they wanted was a scandal that would compromise the power structure he had built. But Cole was determined to take a different path. The press conference was scheduled for the afternoon. The Harrington Enterprises building was surrounded by journalists, cameras, and insatiable curiosity. The moment Cole entered the room, the energy in the environment shifted. He, who always moved with the confidence and power of a man who knew exactly what to do, was now standing there, facing a sea of expectant eyes, his face more serious than ever. What would he do? Would he deny the paternity? Would he distance himself? Would he hide the truth as his advisors suggested? He took a step forward, breathed deeply, and, in a simple yet meaningful gesture, began to speak. "Yes, the child is mine," he declared firmly, his voice echoing in the room without hesitation, without fear. "And the woman carrying this child is the most important person in my life." The press room fell silent. The cameras stopped capturing movement, and the journalists stood still, unsure of what to say or how to react. What he had just said was more than a simple answer. It was a public acknowledgement. He wasn't just admitting his paternity, he was making a declaration of love, of protection, of a commitment to something that was no longer negotiable. Eleanor and the child she carried. It was an act of redemption, an act of courage in the face of a world that had always viewed him with relentless expectations, but which now would be challenged. He continued, his eyes fixed ahead, an intense, almost defiant gleam in them, as the words flowed from his mouth like a promise. "From now on, I will begin delegating responsibilities in my company to focus on my family. What I am, what I have, has no value if it is not to protect and care for the person who matters most to me. I will do whatever it takes to ensure my child has a future and that Elena knows she can count on me. I will not hide." The weight of those words didn't just affect the room, it affected the country. Cole's decision, a man who had always been seen as unbeatable, tireless, now became a public act of vulnerability. He was opening his heart to the world, something no one had ever imagined he would do. He was putting aside his armor of a magnate and showing for the first time that there was something more important than his position at the top of the corporate pyramid. There was now the woman he loved and the child he was about to bring into the world. The press conference dragged on, but Cole's words echoed far beyond what he could have imagined. The reporters, usually trained to seek more answers, were now in shock. Some merely recorded the words he said, while others seemed stunned by the magnitude of what was happening. To many, Cole Harrington, the Iron Man, the titan of business, had transformed before their eyes into a completely different man. He was no longer playing the game by the same rules. Meanwhile, in Elena's apartment, she watched the press conference, her hands clasped together and her heart pounding. She watched him on screen, his solid and confident image, the voice that always made her feel secure, now full of conviction. She didn't know what to expect upon seeing that declaration. Part of her feared he would backtrack, that he would pull away. But there, before the cameras, he was reaffirming what he had told her in private months earlier. He loved her, and he was willing to give his life for her and their child. The relief that filled Elena was immense. She had never imagined that a man like Cole could surrender in such a way, to be so vulnerable before a world that did not forgive flaws. He had shown her how much she meant to him, not just in whispers behind closed doors, but before a nation that was now watching her. She felt her eyes water, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of emotion, of something she could barely describe. She had feared for so long that everything was a mistake, that he would pull away. But at that moment, all she felt was the certainty that he had chosen her, and that somehow made her believe that their life, no matter how challenging, was still on the right path. At the end of the press conference, as the reporters began to disperse and the reality of his decision began to settle in Cole's mind, he knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, there would be criticism, but deep down, he was more certain than ever that making this decision was the only possible path. Because for him, what was at stake was no longer the empire, nor the finances, but the love and future he wanted to build with Elena and their child. The public revelation of Cole and Elena marked the beginning of a new phase, not just for them, but for the future of their family. The scandal and the weight of the media began to dissipate, but the impact of Cole's choices still lingered over them, like a shadow that demanded more than just a public decision. It demanded a reconstruction of the life they had once known. In the days following the historic speech, Cole stepped away from his position at the top of the corporate hierarchy, delegating responsibilities to trusted vice presidents and executives. What had once seemed like an obsession, a reflection of the need for absolute control, was now being left behind. He was focused on something much bigger, much more personal: his family, Elena, and the child they were about to have. He began attending all of Elena's pregnancy appointments, staying by her side during every ultrasound, every exam. He was no longer just physically present, but emotionally involved, sharing each moment as if it were the most important part of his life. Cole, the man who once controlled empires, now found himself in the waiting room of a doctor's office, holding Elena's hand, feeling the anxiety and joy of every new step she took in her pregnancy. He listened intently to every detail from the doctors, wanting to understand every aspect of the pregnancy, as if it were a part of him, as if he had finally found a purpose greater than any corporate meeting. Elena, in turn, looked at him with new eyes. The man who once seemed impenetrable, distant, was now becoming someone she could rely on, someone who was showing vulnerability, someone willing to sacrifice the facade he had built to be a constant presence in her life and in their child's. She knew he didn't have a magic formula for being the perfect father, nor the ability to handle what it meant to have a family. But he was trying, and that made all the difference. Every gesture of affection, every smile during the ultrasounds was proof that he was there, not just as the father of the baby, but as the man who was learning to surrender to what truly mattered. As the weeks passed, their lives began to rearrange. Elena, who had always been comfortable in her routine at the hospital, now felt the need for more space, more privacy. She knew that their time together was changing, and they needed a fresh start, away from the curious gazes of the city and the pressures of public life. Cole, for his part, knew that the only way to protect his new family was to step away from the world that had shaped him until now. Together, they decided to move to a discreet property in the Virginia Hills, a secluded house where they could find peace and connect in a way that modern life had never allowed. The house, with its wooden walls and large windows offering a view of the green and peaceful landscape, represented the perfect refuge for them. It was a place where they could breathe without the constant pressure of business and the media. In the silence of the mountains, Eleanor and Cole found the freedom to be who they truly were, without external expectations. There, far from Washington, D.C., and the responsibilities of the Harrington Empire, they began to rediscover each other in ways that had once seemed impossible. Elena continued her work as a nurse, but now in a local clinic where she could help people in the community without the pressure of being associated with a famous name. She found her identity in something simple and pure, caring for others, as she had always done, but now with a renewed purpose. She wasn't just taking care of patients, she was helping to build a new life, a life she shared with Cole and their son, Noah, who was growing every day. She quietly but firmly reaffirmed her independence. She didn't want to be seen as Cole Harrington's wife, the magnate's woman. She wanted to be recognized for who she was, for her own accomplishments, and for the person she had become over the years. Working at the local clinic, being part of that community, gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She knew her life had changed, but she also knew she couldn't let her identity be overshadowed by a world that didn't understand her true essence. Cole, for his part, began to withdraw more and more from his responsibilities in the corporate world. He was still involved in the business, but the truth was he had started delegating more and more, investing his time in the family. He spent long afternoons with Elena, helping with the preparations for Noah's arrival. He was learning to be the father he never imagined he could be, but somehow now knew he wanted to become. The two of them spent more time together at the property, exploring the surrounding nature, walking the trails, talking about everything and nothing. Eleanor, who had once felt disconnected from Cole in many ways, was now beginning to feel that he truly saw her, that he understood her. And, for the first time, she was beginning to see him differently. He was more than the businessman. He was someone who, though still imperfect and fearful, was willing to fight for them, for her, for their family. Their reconciliation was not just a process of forgiveness. It was a reconstruction, a slow and deep process where both of them began to understand each other in a more genuine, more real way. What Cole and Elena were creating together wasn't just a family, but also a new vision of life, where authenticity and real connection replaced the illusions and power games that had characterized their lives up until that point. And, as the baby arrived, bringing with it the promise of a bright future, Elena knew that this was the beginning of a new journey. A journey of discoveries, of growth, and most importantly of love. They had overcome the greatest obstacles, not only the external ones, but the internal ones, those that truly define a shared life. Together, they were starting anew, and with each passing day, it became clearer. Their love was stronger than any empire or legacy, more powerful than any fear or insecurity. The afternoon was slowly bidding farewell, painting the sky with golden and reddish hues as autumn left its mark on the leaves that fell gently in the garden of their new home. The property in the hills of Virginia had become more than just a refuge. It was a home, a place where they had begun to rewrite their lives, far from the pressures of the outside world, immersed in the tranquility of a simple and genuine everyday life. The sun hid behind the tall trees, casting a soft light that seemed to reflect Elena's state of mind. The warmth of the day was still present, but the coolness of the afternoon signaled the change of seasons. And in that shift of seasons, their destiny seemed to be in transition as well, from a journey marked by pain and uncertainty to a new era where hope and love were beginning to bloom. Eleanor walked slowly through the garden, feeling the gentle breeze caress her face, observing the vibrant colors of the fallen leaves around her. She was accompanied by Noah, her son, who was now in Cole's arms. The baby, with his curious eyes and easy smile, looked at the world with an innocence that was enchanting, unaware of the complexities of the life surrounding him. But for Elena, he was the symbol of everything she had overcome, everything she had now, a new life, a new chance, and a family that, though small, was full of love. Cole walked beside her, carrying Noah in his arms. He moved silently, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. He knew the moment was right, that the time had finally come to seal what they had built. Love, forgiveness, reconstruction. He wanted more than just to live beside Elena. He wanted to make her his wife, to build a future with her side by side as a true family. With a gentle gesture, Cole knelt on the ground before her. Surprise overtook Elena, and she looked at him with wide eyes, not knowing what was about to happen. Noah, in his arms, seemed perfectly calm, as if he also understood the importance of the moment. The silence between them was heavy with meaning. The world seemed to pause for a moment, allowing only them to exist in that small patch of earth and love. Cole looked deeply into Elena's eyes, with an intensity she had never seen before. He was there, more vulnerable than ever, and that touched her in a way she never knew she could be touched. He gazed at her, with a light but sincere smile, and then, with a softness that matched the moment, took a small, simple ring from his pocket, nothing extravagant or adorned with precious stones, but a pure symbol, without embellishments, something that reflected who they were now, something simple yet immeasurably valuable. "You've given me everything," he began, his voice firm but full of emotion. "You've given me love. You've given me a child. You've given me a new life. Now I want to build that future with you. I want to walk by your side every day through everything that comes next. I have no more doubts. You're my reason to keep going, and I want that to never end." His words echoed in her mind, but the meaning of them settled deep in her heart. Elena felt the tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't try to stop them. They were tears of relief, of happiness, and of a peace she never imagined could exist. The man she loved, the man who had been an enigma in her life, was now before her, surrendering completely, asking to share a future with her. Cole, with Noah in his arms, waited for her response, his eyes fixed on her, his gaze asking for more than any words could express. He was there with his heart open, with a sincerity she never imagined he would have. It was as if, finally, he had surrendered to what truly mattered. And for Elena, there were no more doubts. She knelt beside him, feeling the warmth of his body and the weight of the decision they were now making together. She looked at little Noah in her arms, and the love she felt for their child, for the life they had created, filled her entire being. She looked at Cole with teary eyes and, with a voice she couldn't control, said, "Yes, Cole. Yes, I accept. I want this life with you. I want to be your wife. I want to build this future together." The words fell like a release, and when Cole pulled her into a tight embrace, everything seemed to align. The world around them didn't matter. They had been through so much together, overcome so much, that nothing would separate them now. The pain and uncertainty were now part of the past, and the future they were now building with such strength, was in front of them, full of promises and love. The moment Cole slipped the ring onto her finger, a symbol of his commitment, the bond between them strengthened in a way that words couldn't describe. The future lay ahead of them, and more than that, it was with them, in every step they would take, in every day they would live as husband and wife. Their lives had changed, but in that moment, in those Virginia hills, Eleanor and Cole knew that together they were ready to write a new chapter. What had once seemed impossible, a love unexpected, a family created in an improbable way, was now the solid foundation upon which they could build everything they had always dreamed of. And with that simple and sincere proposal, Cole sealed their fate in a way that no one could ever break. 5 years had passed since the day Cole and Elena began to build a new life. That chapter of their lives, filled with pain, transformation, and challenges, now seemed distant, like a story from another time, from another life. But even with the distance that time had brought, the love they had shared remained the solid foundation upon which everything was built. Eleanor and Cole had found a way to live peacefully and fully, away from the spotlight, away from the demands and expectations that had once trapped them. The external pressure, the discussions about business and image, now seemed like things from a distant past, and in their place was a life filled with simplicity, love, and purpose. Eleanor divided her time between the village clinic, where she continued to help people with the same dedication as before, and her new journey as a mother. She had become an essential figure in the community, not only as a nurse, but as a woman who gave herself entirely to her calling. The hospital, with its bustling life and endless demands, had now become part of a routine that fulfilled her and made her feel connected to the world around her. Motherhood had changed her in ways she never imagined. She found balance, strength, and joy in the simple act of caring, whether for her patients or for her son. Noah, Cole and Elena's child, was growing up surrounded by love, affection and simplicity. He was a happy child, playing in the green fields surrounding their house, running freely with the dogs that Cole had brought, filled with the energy of a childhood full of precious moments. Although his parents were recognized figures, they made sure to raise Noah differently. He wasn't treated like a public figure, but like any other child, with his own friends, his own challenges, and a sense of normalcy that in many ways reflected the simple life Elena had always dreamed of. Cole, for his part, had transformed. The man who once symbolized absolute power, the magnate of business, was now someone completely different. He still held a position of influence in the corporate world, but his true passion had shifted. He dedicated himself to philanthropy, causes that deeply moved him and reflected the inner change he had gone through. He supported organizations that provided medical care in underserved communities and spent much of his time involved in projects aimed at improving the lives of those around him. More importantly, he had become a present father, someone who invested in Noah's future, not just with material wealth, but with love, time, and the values he had learned to cultivate alongside Elena. They lived in a simple house, but one full of history and meaning, situated in the hills of Virginia. The land was vast and lush, with views that seemed endless, but it was the home they had chosen to live in. The place was small, but enough for the peaceful life they had built together. They had moved away from the big cities, the grand mansions, and the bustling towns. Their focus was now on family, raising their son, and the peace they found in their daily routine. Their life was no longer marked by the pressures of society or the struggle for professional success. They had overcome those challenges and were now focused on building a meaningful life, free from external distractions. Cole and Elena were now the pillars for each other, and the love they shared had become an example for everyone around them. Their love had become more than just a personal story. It was a legend, a tale of how the ordinary woman, the community hospital nurse, had transformed the most powerful man in the country. But the real story wasn't in the power he held or the empire he commanded. The real story was about how they had found each other, how they had rebuilt together, how they had overcome the obstacles that life had imposed on them. Their love was proof that true greatness wasn't in what you possessed, but in what you shared with those you love. The house they lived in was always filled with laughter, long conversations at the dinner table, and simple moments that spoke louder than any grand gesture or gift. When the sun set and the golden light enveloped the landscape, Eleanor and Cole would find themselves in the garden, with Noah running around, and they would gaze at the horizon together, as if the world had slowed down just so they could enjoy the fruits of the journey they had walked. They knew that, contrary to what many thought, true happiness wasn't in fame or power. It was in the simple things, in intertwined hands, in conversations at dusk, and in the certainty that the future they were creating would be built on pillars of love, respect, and understanding. And as time passed, their story became more than just a memory for the two of them. It spread, like a soft flame that touched everyone who knew them. It was the story of a love that survived everything, that overcame the scandal, the adversities, and the pressures of life. And in the end, it was the story of how two hearts from such different worlds were able to unite, not just for a moment, but for an entire lifetime. Because in the end, the legacy of Elena and Cole's love wasn't something that could be destroyed or undone. It was timeless, and its impact would continue to grow, not in material wealth or external achievements, but in the way they lived together, loved together, and above all, turned what seemed impossible into something real and lasting. In every choice, Cole and Elena discovered something profound about themselves, that true power doesn't lie in control, but in the vulnerability of surrendering to love. Their journey, marked by highs and lows, showed that even when the world tries to pull them apart, what unites two hearts can be stronger than any obstacle. Their transformation wasn't just about becoming parents or external changes, but about rediscovering each other, learning to live together in the simplicity of genuine love. And perhaps, in the end, what truly matters is the courage to love, no matter what the world says. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us, where are you listening from? Your support is what allows us to continue bringing stories like this.